Um, so okay, two things I wanted to talk about in terms of compatibility between the add-ons and about the actions. So I have written a little bit of wiki. It's not complete, but I wanted to maybe get some initial feedback and then finalize it. And have, if you go to ATK, actually, let me start by presenting. I could present this. Okay, so now I'm presenting, so you should be able to follow where I'm going, what I'm doing. Data. So if you go here and then inside the wiki, there is if you scroll down below, there are a number of proposals which I'm shortening, like agile data or ATK data proposal, and then year and the month. So for example, this one was proposing how to build a deep copy, and that has been implemented. This is a spreadsheet persistence. Essentially, you have a spreadsheet like Excel. Yeah, and you just you can associate model with the persistence by specifying a specific sheet, and then you have your grid. You can modify the data, but instead of saving to SQL, it will save back into a spreadsheet. So that was the idea. And the two actions, the two new ones I wanted to add is about actions, about ability to register model-specific actions, and the other one, which I haven't detailed yet, is about protocols. So I wanted to talk about those two and get some of your ideas. And then if anyone else wants to talk about, maybe there were some ideas about routing. So we can talk about that as well. So guys, how much do you know about protocols? Yeah. It's I mean, you don't protocol oriented programming. Well, actually, it is implemented in PHP, and it is in many languages. Um, but it's the most, I would say, the best implementation is in Swift. But in PHP, it is done through traits and uh, interfaces. So I'll try to explain. What's this? What is the main file here? Okay. So protocols. Okay. This needs to be closed. The idea of a protocol is that you can have a class and as a class, or maybe another structure, but in PHP usually a class, and it has some fields, it has some methods, and so on and so on. And you want to enhance it in certain way by adding more property or by adding some qualities to that class without actually extending it from somewhere. The examples in Swift for the protocols is, for example, countable. Yeah, so if you have maybe a data structure which doesn't implement countable protocol, so it does have elements, but there is no way how you can count how many elements are inside. Maybe it's a stream, like you're downloading something from the internet, so you don't know what's the length of the data. You can add this protocol to the object without extending it from somewhere, and it's quite easy. You might be required to declare a method or do something to that class in order to support that protocol, but then you're good. In PHP, the protocol essentially is a combination of interface and trait. So let's say there are two packages. Let's say the first, not packages, but there are two add-ons developed by different developers, and the first developer builds a package which is called like login sign up. Yeah, so the idea of this add-on is that now users can sign up for your application, but this login sign up, it requires user to click a link inside an email. So somehow it needs to send a message to the user or email to the user. But this add-on doesn't want to implement this functionality. Instead, there is another add-on which is called, let's call it SMTP email. We could call it like this. So SMTP email add-on, and the purpose of this add-on is to allow send SMTP email to someone. So the first add-on must support working with the second one, but if there is a third add-on which is called what would be called, like MailJet email, right? So if someone writes a new add-on called MailJet add-on, it should also be possible to use login sign up with this new add-on as well, right? So the way how this is done requires add-on that supports mail protocol, right? And this one implements protocol. It can implement multiple protocols as well, and then there could be another add-on which also implements mail protocol. So now these are interchangeable. Okay, and I mean, if we working more on doing add-ons and creating and making them interoperable, we need to make sure that we define these protocols. So who is going to implement, who is going to define this mail protocol? It probably needs to be defined somewhere, right? But it can't be could be like standard protocols maybe, and then login might define, like maybe in this add-on there are also some private protocols that defined in this specific add-on, and then other extensions might target maybe ACL. Yeah, so there will be like another protocol which is called ACL, and then this protocol could be implemented by, again, some other add-ons offering a different implementation of ACL capability. So that's kind of the general idea, right? So I'm kind of vaguely explaining it. So currently, in the PHP universe, they use traits, and For instance, you know there is a library for, let me see, yeah, so Guzzle is a library which implements HTTP messaging. But the way how it does it is by declaring that it implements a certain PSR, PSR7. How does it? I'm not sure actually. PSR. Provide, yeah, yeah. Again, it's depending on the standard. I remember I was, yeah, like HTTP client. So this standard essentially defines how an object can implement client interface. So the interface is defined within the standard, and there's actually a GitHub. So it's in here, but there is also a GitHub library which would correspond to PSR, like PSR 11. So you can extend that, and you can take these from this namespace. You can use the interface, and you say you create a class which implements this interface, and then you have to implement a method called send request, and so on and so on. So in our case, going back to this example with sending a message, we could implement an interface which would have like send email, and then you pass some parameters, and whichever add-on implements that, it should have support for that. But the problem I see here is that if we're talking about ATK data, it is much higher level than core PHP. So in many cases, I'll give you 3 examples. The first example is called audit, right? And the way how it's currently implemented is that if you're using ATK audit, you have to extend a model that this audit provides. Okay. Technically, you can probably use your own model. Yeah, so in here, there is a controller. And when you initialize a controller, there is a audit model, which by default is a audit log provided within the namespace of ATK for audit. But you can also use your own model. The problem, though, is that your own model might not have the correct fields. It might not have the fields, or might not just be good for this controller, and there is no way to kind of validate that. So in a way, you can end up with a solution that's quite bad. So one way is that if we check, so we take audit model and we verify that it actually has all these fields inside this controller. That's one way. But the other way is if we take any model at all and then extend it by adding the necessary fields, and then finally saying, okay, now this model implements this protocol, and all the controller have to do is they have to check for whether the model implements the protocol or not. So it might be an easier check, but it's about us. Well, trade cannot do it overall. So, but I just now thinking in this direction, right? So what I was doing. Okay, let me show you what I wrote so far. Essentially, we talking about actions here. So in some cases, you want I mean how the model which is audit log model different from any other model out there. And I would say that it's not about the fields that the model have, but it's about a method that the model has. So in our case, if the model has a certain method, which would say like log action, and then you pass some parameters, then we could say, yeah, this model is suitable for being an audit log. So let me go down here, and I would say for audit log would be like any model, we call method record action, and then as a parameter we could say first would be model, and then operation, and then something else. So why doesn't it like that? So let's say if any add-on any model creates this method with the defined parameters, and then audit log add-on will execute this method and pass the parameters as declared in here, then the audit log will be recorded. And regardless of how you implement your audit log model inside your application, it's absolutely up to you. But the way how like the rest of ATK will record audit is through this method. And that would be the essence of the audit protocol, to have this. Sorry, I don't quite understand. Mm-hmm. Yes. All right. So let's say now I have a UI or date, doesn't matter what, and I'm doing like blah equals new, we'll say like user admin. So because it doesn't matter, right? It could create something else. And then as a parameter here, I could say mailer would be some class. So I could define which class would be the mailer. And then the user admin will rely on this class and will execute send message of this class. But we could say like mailer model maybe, or message model, because in ATK we work. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. So we're using quite a lot. But the problem with what we're using right now is that, as I said, in audit, the problem is that you have to extend audit from a specific place. And for example, Philip, he wants to have a custom audit tracking inside his application, and he have to rebuild everything entirely. And if Gora would have some sort of add-on that visualizes the history, and he would like to use that, he can't use that because he has a custom audit implementation that simply wouldn't work together. I'll controller. Well, there were no validations. So in all the ATK, there were no checks, no validation. You just define a dynamic method, and that's it. Which still technically possible. So the current ATK does support dynamic methods. We could do that. I wanted to show you two other examples. And one of them, I'll call it unique field, and this would be I'll call it increment. So the purpose of unique field is something you can attach to the model, and this allows you to define unique field on the PHP level. So you could say that, okay, SQL supports unique fields, but then we're not always using SQL as a persistence. Another problem is that if, for example, you're deleting the records and then you create a record which has the same value of unique field as a deleted record, in some cases that's okay, but it's not possible to do that inside SQL. The other problem is if you have multiple users and you want to have uniqueness within the records of the same user, then it's not possible. So the idea to have this unique field, like how we would implement it now, and the current implementation which I have in my project is we have a controller, and by controller I mean a separate class, which you add inside the model, and it will define a couple of hooks in that model, and those hooks will create validation before saving. I'll try to find it. Yeah, so that's the controller, unique fields. So you initialize that, and then you define which fields you want to be unique. It defines the validation hook, and when it does validation, it will create a clone of a current model, add condition where there is a record with a different ID but the same value of that field, and if it was found, then we will return an error message. Says duplicate error exists. So the problem with this one is that we can't really extend from this model. In case of audit log, we can technically extend from a external field, but in this case we can't extend. And it is implemented as a class, which probably is not so bad. So it does require some field. But that's not the only way how this can be implemented. We also have a dynamic model. So maybe inside init, it could do something like this owner register method, and then register new method inside the model, which is also permissible. And in other cases, user might say, okay, I don't want to use this dark magic from ATK 4.3. Instead, I want to use trait. And he can implement, instead of using class, he implements a trait, and he adds the trait to his model. But again, he needs to manually initialize that. So inside his init, he needs, in this case, he uses add, but in case with trait, you have to call some other method to initialize this property. But we could say that, once the unique field is added to the model, it gives them some sort of new ability. We could call it again a protocol, that this model is now capable of doing something it wasn't been capable of doing in the past. A what? Create protocol. Dynamic method. What is this? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes, we do have dynamic method tray. That's right. Yeah. But I'm saying, it doesn't matter how you do it, because technically there are three ways how you can implement that. You can either add a method yourself, you can add dynamic method from another object, or you could use a trait. There are different people that will implement it in a different way. But what is important for us that there is a certain method inside the model that the rest of ATK can rely on and execute that method. I'm gonna give you another example so that make sure that you're following. And this is about archiving. Yeah. So let's say I want to create an add-on that allows user to archive any model at all. Right. So GoRaw has an application with 50 different models, and GoRaw adds a new add-on for archiving, and now every single model, or the models he specifies, can now be archived. And the way how it's being archived is by like any model. So you call this method archive, and then the record which is currently loaded is removed from the model and is stored somewhere else. So that's the implementation of my archiving add-on, and again, it's done through a method. So executing some method, and something happens to it. You mean in ATK UI? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Seeds, right? Seeds. So we're doing seeds for the UI, right? That's the UI, ATK UI. Virtual page again. Yes, but you see, Gaurav, I mean, in this case, for form, right? So I can't put any class here, right? It's not, I can't create my own class and put it in here because this needs to be a view. This needs to be a view. I need to extend it from view because CRUD expects to create a form and then add it inside the model window. So yeah, what you're saying is that there is some way in ATK UI to do it. Yes, yes. But if you think about it, whatever I'm passing here, it needs to have two qualities. First of all, if I add it into a view, it should be able to render itself. But secondly, it requires this object to have a working set model, because I will be setting model for this. So it might be form, but I can do something else. But it probably will not work if I supply a menu here or a button. It will still draw the button, but it will not be functional. I will not be able to set model for that. So I mean, it will probably work, but I would say it's not how it's supposed to be. But the ways when I'm talking about ITK data is that there are many different ways where we want add-ons to interact with other add-ons and or with the UI, and which needs to be consistent. And we should be able to define something like, if I'm building an interface, for example. Remember we had this thing about queues, right? Queues. There was a queue admin where you can execute jobs and work with that. What if I want to write a specific queue implementation for that queue admin? Okay, yeah, sure. Uh, Hold on a second. So regarding what you you suggested there, I don't think I fully understood what you were trying to say. it's a it's a uh, I understood that you have something similar. So when you say interface, you mean PHP interface. Okay. Okay. But the interfaces doesn't really work like that. So if you have okay, let's say we go with this. So there is a somewhere interface IDK for add-on. I'll just gonna write this. And then what do you put in here? So what goes here? Okay, hold on. So when you're saying in ATK 4, I think there was a class called add-on. Controller add-on. So we had it in the past, right? Is used to help in installation of your add-ons. And basically you had to have one class inside every add-on which would extend this, and there are a bunch of various pages like defining where it is would help add-on integrate that. But in a way this is a substitution for Composer. Yeah, now we don't have to do it anymore because Composer just takes care of all of these things, like adding roots. But well, first of all, okay, so my opinion on what you said, I understand what you're suggesting. I don't understand the benefit of adding this requirement, because if this is empty, if this is empty, I could just do this, and I'm technically not losing anything. Hold on, Gaurav. Let me finish. So I think I'm not losing anything. Okay, that's my. I don't see what do we gain. Secondly, if a third party implements some add-on, maybe the add-on is not designed for the ATK in the first place. They use some interfaces. The only reason I see for this would be if I could have something like I could write code like that. ATK interfaces equals object get all interfaces and then filter by or like where this stands like extends ATK for add-on. So I would be able to somehow list all the interfaces implemented by an object, filter by ATK for add-on, and then these are the ATK interfaces that it implements, and we have some special treatment for those. But I don't think this is possible. Also, I don't see why and how that would be used. Well, they're not implementing. This is empty, and they're extending it. So that's not really implementation. Hmm. Okay, so let's park this for now. I think I just wanted to. So I haven't finished thinking about this as well. If you have some extra ideas, um, think about it. Maybe send it over to me later on. But as we start working more and more on different add-ons for ATK, I think we need some way that we will say, okay, if anyone wants to build audit, it needs to follow the standard ATK audit. So probably there would be a package called ATK4 slash protocols or something like that, which will define all of these, and then technically we could allow third-party packages to implement those things, and then other packages rely on them. So this would be just a bunch of interfaces without any implementation. It is very similar to how PSR is doing it. So you can install any PSR uh, interface from GitHub and then implement it, and various packages implement that. But that would be only ATK data level, maybe like ATK level. So ATK UI and ATK data could rely on that. The other thing I wanted to mention here is that traits and interfaces, they're only good for requesting uh, methods. But in some cases, especially for the models, we also want to request certain fields to be present within the model. So I'm not sure how to do that. I'll have to think about that. But that's, for now, I see that as a as a whole. I'll think about that. And if we're done talking with that, I'd like to talk about actions. Tell you more about that, and because it is consequential with this. So, do you have any more questions regarding protocols? Okay. All right. So, about actions. Um, this is ability to define action is, yeah, actually essentially what I'm writing here is the way how ATK data works. It represents your object, real life object, as a some sort of object in PHP, but various user interfaces and APIs and add-ons, they can expect or examine your model, get list of fields, get field properties, and they can build UI or build certain functionality based around what they have discovered inside this model. For example, form will make a list of fields. It will consult the model, asking which of these fields are editable, what are the types of these fields, and then it will decorate the field. And same does the grid and the table and so on and so on. What we don't have at the moment is any way to discover and decorate methods. So model can define a method, and for example, I'll use the same archiving, right? So for example, my model has a method called archive, but there is no way how ATK UI can automatically decorate this method. And the proposal around actions would be to create enough meta information so that UI can decorate those. Yeah. As an example, okay, let's say there is a send notification. Again, going back to this transport, which can send messages to a user. Inside the init of that would be this code, which says add a new action, send notification, Then we're describing what arguments are necessary, and somehow we specify that the first argument requires the value which is a transport. This is like a default value if the value is not provided. And you know, this would be like argument string, and then so okay, after that, you know, send notification, we defined the arguments. I think there are some bracket problems here. You define the body, yeah. So you could either say function, and here goes your code, which actually sends notification, and as a parameter you get transport and message, and then you do whatever necessary in here, or you can probably link it to existing method inside your model. Okay, can you still hear me? All right. So the idea for that, for defining like that, so if I'm building an add-on such as CRUD or maybe a card or whatever, it can ask a model saying not get fields, but it can say get actions, and the model will return a list of all the possible actions, including editing, deleting, and so on. And I can simply put buttons for all of them, and if yeah, let me just first talk through this because I think that you have the implementation, that's great, but it's important that your implementation can work with everyone else's implementations, and so we have some sort of standard, right? And the reason why, I mean, if you don't want to use this, you don't use it, it's fine. But if, for example, you want a standard CRUD to have extra buttons in here, like say hi, it's quite easy. You add a new action here, which is presented as say hi, and then you define how it's going to be executed. Now, a couple of things here which I noted. So we do have information about the arguments, which means if, let's say, there's a CRUD and executing this method requires certain arguments, then when user clicks on this, we might need to ask user for those arguments if those arguments are not, if developer didn't supply those arguments. Again, that's normal. You're sending a message. You need to provide the message body, and if the body is not provided, then you need to do it whenever you click. You might also define an action, whether it should be listed here, like for every single record, or on the top. Yeah, sometimes you like delete all could be an action of the model. Also, in some cases you want to select multiple records and you want to execute this action on those records only. Yeah, so that also should be possible. And finally, for the action, when you're defining the action, you can say which icon you want with this action. Like in this case, it's a trash can, but maybe you want some different icon, and whether we should ask user for the confirmation when he clicks on this. And finally, the very important thing about the action is we should be able to ask model or for every single record whether it's permissible to execute the action or not. And this is where the ACLs come in. So if the ACL system right now, the way how ACL system works right now, it can change certain fields into read-only based on which user is logged in, but it cannot do anything with the actions. But with this, we should be able to also deny execution of certain methods in certain conditions before they actually execute the action. Access control list. So in a way, it's a mechanic which says which user is allowed to execute action and which user is not. But also can take which record the action is performed on. So, for example, as an administrator, you might be able to delete every record, but as a user, you can delete only a record which has a draft state. Yeah, go on. Now go ahead. Is on the bottom right. Yes. Hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's ask Gaurav and Philip what they think. Francesco, Philip, what? Okay. Which syntax? The one Gaurav proposed or me? With the add action. Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So like I think so in this case and also in Gaurav's case, there is a problem. Um, I'll try to explain. So by showing you, I probably showed this before. Method executor. Do you know this? Method executor. So that's a view. It's essentially a view. And you need to specify two things to it. The first one is model, and then the second one is method. And the idea is that you can add method executor to somewhere, so you can add it to your page, and then it will examine the arguments of that method, and it will display a form where it allows you to supply the arguments, and then when you fill in all the arguments on the form, you click the button, it will actually execute that. And my question is, will this method executor work with the stuff that Goro made? And will it work with the stuff that you made? Yeah, so okay, here's the example, right? So let's say someone wants to introduce, and I'm going to start now going back to the protocols. Yeah, someone created a new protocol which is called generate password. This password is usable for users who want to just automatically generate password, uses certain algorithm. So someone who have their own model for the user, they might want to acquire this method, and in order to do that, we're going back to the protocols. So some way they include that extension or that add-on that generates the protocol and initialize it inside their model. Um, Now that it is initialized, we should also be able to execute that. And uh, the question is how this method executor could be extended in such a way so not only it is included as a protocol, but also it registers itself as an action, and this action is available to the UI, and UI knows who is allowed to generate new password, uh, under which conditions, and should it ask for the confirmation, or whatever should it do. Also, if it has any arguments, what are the default values for the arguments? Should we ask user about these arguments? But so those two things together, if we implement them correctly, then Gaurav, if Gaurav follows that and he creates a bunch of models that follow these protocols and creates actions. Once I integrate it with a master CRUD, all those actions will be visible for me. So if I want to have a different UI while still using Gaurav's models, I will be allowed to. But right now, Gaurav has to rely on his own UI extension because it will not work with anyone else's UI extension. So if yes, yeah. So you need to patch the crowd, you need to patch the grid, and then someone else introduce something else. You have to worry about APIs. Yeah. So will your method be callable through API? Technically, yeah, exactly. And so I'm well also working on SAST, where we allow users to uh, define any method they like. We would like to make it possible to add a different protocols into those models. So he will just go and use a switch. Yeah, I'll probably can show you the way how it is currently implemented, and I don't really like it. And then, but it will give you some idea. So if I have a data model like a cartridge in here, I could click Object Settings, and there is a checkbox which is called Enable Audit. So if I switch it on, switch it on. So what this should do is add a new line inside the model init code, which initializes the audit or make the model use that protocol. And possibly there are some parameters in there. But in Gaurav's case, right? So can I add the checkbox which also enables other things? Maybe there is a checkbox here for a unique password. So if I click the button, it will enable unique password. And as soon as I close it, there will be an extra button in here to generate unique password for every record. I'm just giving you this as an example, but I think that's where we want to be. So that's at least with SAST. Yeah. Okay. So protocols and action, to describe that, uh, because we make model very discoverable, and all the fields are very discoverable. It has a lot of meta information. The UI relies on that. ATK API relies on that, and it can do a lot of things for us as long as we have the model done correctly. So I guess maybe later on, let's say Philip will be building his new application. He will just have to define the models and use the correct UIs, and that's it. Define all the actions. There's less and less time spending with the UI. Sorry. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just have to. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try to finalize this, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about the syntax here. So I initially I thought, we could, and I guess as Francesca said, we have already a really nice functionality because we could do add and then anything in here. So my idea was do that, add new action, and then specify a lot of information inside here as a parameter. Because if we do that, we don't have to add anything new to the model. It's already working. Also, this works as well. Add new field. You can actually do that with ATK already. So instead of calling add field, you can do add and then field inside. So you get to interact with the field object directly. And over time, not only it helps us to not to overload the model, but also we will be able to strip it down and make it simpler. Mm-hmm. There is actually already something like that. I'll show you what it is. So it's in ATK4. Okay, so you know that all models are associated with persistence, right? So persistence has a hook. It's called after add. And if you use that, it will be called with every single model when the model is associated with the persistence. Yeah. No, I mean, if it wants to, then yes. But I'll give you an example. Yeah. So, for example, we in our project we have a very strict requirement that a user might not access records which belong to other user. So we have a hook in here, and this hook will look for a user ID inside the model, and if there is a user ID, it will add a condition for that user ID. But yeah, system ID or user ID. But the thing, the important part here is if the same model is used with a session persistence or array persistence or a cache persistence, it will not add this hook because it doesn't make sense, right? Like in an array or inside the session, you will not have any other users' data. Yeah, so there's no point having that. So it's only for the database. It kind of defines the rule of that database, but also audit works in the same way. So whenever you want to place audit on all the models, you do it here. If the model is being loaded from the UI persistence, there is no hook there, and this is why if it will not do those silly things when you fill out the form and some ghost records appear in the audit log saying like. So I think that's what you need in your case, Gaurav. Yeah. So it allows you to patch all the models in a certain way. The way how we do it in SAST, we actually don't use that because user can go on object settings and enable and disable. So that code will appear inside the init, which pretty much is the same thing. So init is called again when the persistency is linked with the model. So either way it will be called. Yeah. Of course it does. All right, anything else we want to discuss today? Uh, Let me think. Yeah, so you no, he wants only JS. Yeah. Let's see. So that should be inside view somewhere. Get HTML and the rendering. Right, JSON. No. Yeah, but what it does, yeah. So that this actually should give us the GS, but the difference between render and render all. Hold on, which is one of them is a recursive render. Yeah, so because with the recursive render, we need to collect all the JavaScript and place them inside a certain location within the application. I'll see what the app does. Probably wouldn't be rendered in here. Hmm. So this is what it does right now. So it calls render all, which recursively renders everything, and then it calls get.js on that HTML. So you can render that. The render all will append HTML to the parent, so it will not give you the HTML. But if you call render, it probably will give you HTML. And then you call get.js, which gets all the JS from that HTML and all the child elements, which is then. So okay, we had a problem, right? So if it's just one occurrence of ATK view, then it was working fine because we would execute it. I think we were using get HTML. Or rather render. We were using render, yeah, because we're using render because render does render all as you saw before, and then it will output get.js and also the rendering of a current template. So, well, it should. I think it should work. I don't think why it wouldn't work. If you, but if this is the parent. So if this is a part of the bigger tree render, I'm not actually sure where the GS might go because let's see, get each element moves GS like slightly up. I think it should work. It might be some other bug. Yeah, it should be there, I think. Yeah, so the problem we were facing is that if you render view in one location and in another location, you get a problem. First of all, you have duplication of IDs. That's kind of bad, and secondly, they come with a piece of JavaScript. Each of them would have a JavaScript, so that wasn't very well. The way how we accomplished this is we even though we had a different application which is responsible for rendering the entire HTML, we had another application, another app of ATK UI, which had its own tree, and the views were part of that tree. Except that whenever we rendered that, we would extract only the views we wanted, and the JavaScript would automatically go inside a different place in the legacy application. Okay, right. Okay, I don't have anything else to discuss, so it's probably a good time to finish the meeting. Thanks everyone for coming. I'll write the wiki pages and then I'll post them somewhere. Please comment if that's good. But I'll create a playlist inside YouTube. But so what I was saying about these meetings, now if someone wants to have agenda or have a page for them, it should be someone else, but not me. Yeah, Philip. Okay. Yeah, I don't mind. If someone maintains the agenda, I can work with a person and tell him what I just want to be. I don't want to be like a boss of ITK. I want to be one of the members, but I think we need to be more or less equal. Um, so yeah, I just need to like keep myself down a little bit. Don't. Yeah, someone was asking me about the calendar, like the calendar event. I made it, but it didn't share properly. But you know when it is. So Philip, if you want to, if you have any suggestions, I can put them. I'll help you out, but instruct me where you want it. We can have it on Agile Toolkit page or whatever. By the way, guys, speaking about the Agile Toolkit homepage, I don't have time to do anything with it. It is kind of running on an old ATK at the moment, and some information here might be out of date, but people do come here, I think. So I'm not sure what should we do with it, but maybe replace with something more static and simpler. And but I can also put some stuff in here, like if there's a meeting, I can add here. Yeah. So I'm listening. Yeah. Anyway, just tell me, guys, what you want, because I feel that you are more active than me anyway, and I'll change whichever is necessary. Okay. Thanks, everyone.